You're going to have a good chuckle over this.
False statement you made.
I was a little concerned for you too, but I was like,
Between you and your we brought this up and they said, no, we're fine.
I had them all around my fireplace mantle last year, every one of them. Sure. Oh, well. No, let's leave it here for now. The board meeting states.
So let's just say that we can't figure out a loophole. The suggestion is we do what we do is we just let the air flow. You contribute as much as you can. And now we just say, look, there's 5 million here, and we can fund this out, but we won't try to get it to cheap. That's like if you don't interest us up, we'll get some budget and go away. I don't think that conflicts with anything we've got.
The ordinance just says forward.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's gonna fly, by the way, but.
And by the way, in January, we could probably get something that says it's okay, just for a short term.
I mean, ours is very done. I think we're okay here.
I just want to make sure really that if it comes up, that you say something that doesn't get you a little bit farther out on the limb than we're going to talk about. We're participating in
Discussing it. We thought we should bring it up now, it's like budget process. So it's more like. That's the part that gets a little tricky.
well, no, what we do is here's the we understand that
We would work that out ourselves. Stupid thing is, IRS, between several liabilities, that doesn't change the case. Your lawyer's gonna be a little concerned.
well, they're
Rightfully so.
well, on that part, they're actually okay.
All right, well, that's cool. Just because I don't think the plan is that we're flexing.
So maybe make sure you talk to Leanne and make sure during their free time, if they, well, or just, but it's.
She's like, hey, I'm reading this. What is this?
Who wrote this?
Ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask everyone to take their seats and get settled, we would like to begin with our Finance Committee. For your information, just so you know, we do audio and video record our meetings. So to the board members, I ask that when you have something to say on the record, you please push the button on your microphone, and when you're finished, push it so that others can get their chance to speak as well. And with that, we also have a sign language interpreter here today. there was a request, so those parties, if you're in the audience that requested that, if somebody could assist in getting you up to the front row so that you can be in a good position. With that, I'll turn it over to Director McGallis, our Finance Chair.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Would you please call the roll?
Director Anderson,
Here.
Director Buchanan, Director Colson.
Here.
Director DeWitt.
Here.
Director Lewis.
Here.
Director Troiani.
Here.
Director McGallis.
Here.
We have a quorum of 6 present with 1 absent. If the record would also show that Directors Durante, Frega, Fuentes, Hobson, Pang, Ross, Totten, and Chairman Dillard are all also present.
Thank you. Item number 2 is approval of minutes from 2 meetings, November 19th and December 3rd, the 3rd being our special finance meeting. Do we have a motion? Motion by Member DeWitt, seconded by Director Lewis. Roll call.
Director Anderson.
Yes.
Director Colson.
Yes.
Director DeWitt.
Yes.
Director Lewis.
Yes.
Director Troiani.
Yes.
Director McGallis.
Aye.
6 ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. Item number 3 is a report on the monthly financial results for October 2015. Dee?
Good morning, Director and board members. We will try to be brief. We've actually got like 4 finance items on the agenda today, including the budget. So as you can see, this is our financial dashboard. We will review the year-to-date financial results through October 2015. So in general, favorable public funding and expense results continue to more than offset unfavorable operating revenue with only 2 months of 2015 remaining. A little bit about the labor force. The size of the Chicago area labor force held steady in October, while about 4,000 regional jobs were added. This resulted in a decrease in the regional unemployment rate to 5.3%. So it's narrowing the gap, but the national rate is still 5.0%. Let's take a look at ridership. Year-to-date system ridership is 1.4% lower than budget. It's unchanged from last month's report. So for the second consecutive month, system ridership decreased from prior year in October, down by 1.4% as shown on this chart. However, October had 1 fewer weekday than October of 2014, so that accounts for most of the year-over-year decrease. Please note, though, that October is consistently the highest ridership month of the year because it doesn't have any major holidays, schools in session, and generally favorable weather. But for the year, RTA system ridership is now about 0.3% versus 2014. As you know, last month I showed you some peer comparisons, so I can't say we are down less than some of our peers, but we are still down as well. So looking at the ridership summary again, all 3 service boards, as well as ADA Paratransit, continue to see ridership results below budgeted levels. As indicated by the red box, Pace Suburban Service ridership is 7.4% unfavorable to budget and 5% lower than 2014. Again, Pace cites lower gas prices, the discontinuation of cash transfers, and national trends of lower bus ridership as reasons for the decline. So now let's look at operating revenue. This was $16.3 million, or 1.7% unfavorable to budget, primarily due to the lower level of state reduced fare funding being reported by the service boards. Looking at Pace Suburban Service, operating revenue was 6.9% unfavorable, highlighted in red due to the shortfall in reduced fare funding from the state, compounded by lower than budgeted advertising revenue results. When we look at public funding, this shows favorable results to budget for each service board. We are including here actual sales tax through August, which has grown 4.9% over prior years, and a projection for September, which indicates 3.1% growth over September 2014. For the CTA 2015, RET, or real estate transfer tax results, have exceeded budget by $8.4 million, contributed to the highlighted favorable public funding variance of 4.8%. Let's look at system-wide operating expenses now. So through October, they were $44.3 million, or 2.1% favorable to budget, with each service board reporting favorable results for both the month of October and year-to-date. As we have previously reported, over 40% of the favorable variance is attributable to lower fuel prices. So let's look at Pace Suburban, that had a 6.5 favorable to budget expense performance, highlighted in blue, due primarily to fuel savings of $7.2 million. ADA Paratransit's 9% favorable expense performance is being driven by lower purchase transportation, fuel, administrative, and overhead expense. PACE continues to realize lower ADA Paratransit trip costs due to improved terms in their most recent provider contracts. At the regional level, favorable operating expenses and public funding more than offset the unfavorable operating revenue. So it's producing a year-to-date net result, which was $67.2 million favorable to budget, a $10 million improvement over last month's report. PACE Suburban Service and ADA Paratransit both have favorable net result variances in excess of 3%, highlighted in blue due to good expense performance. Let's look at the recovery ratios now. Each of the recovery ratios shown on the expanded recovery ratio chart improved relative to last month's report. On the left, the fair recovery ratio of 38.4 includes passenger revenue only, so we look at that as the pure recovery ratio. When ancillary service board revenue is included, the recovery ratio increases to 43.8% through October, so that's labeled in the all revenue table, in the all revenue column. And in the right section there, we show the statutory recovery ratio labeled with credits as compared to budget. So this stood at 52% through October, 0.4 percentage points unfavorable to budget, primarily again due to the lower reported level of state reimbursement fare. With 2 months remaining in the fiscal year, the system is on track to finish 2015 with strong operating results relative to budget, despite the ridership shortfall. That concludes my remarks, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Bea. Are there any questions or comments? If not, we'll move on to the next item. Item 3B, the semi-annual report on project management oversight. Jim?
So here to present it is Jim Hickey, and he'll take you through the status of the various projects, and he'll also point out projects that have been impacted by the state temporary suspension in the capital program.
Thank you, Bea. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. Today I'm happy to present the current report on project management oversight. We last presented on PMO in June 2015. You received the PMO report as part of your board briefing, and it includes details for every project. The report was designed to make it straightforward for our board to see progress, issues, and risks for transit capital projects in the region. The program currently includes oversight of all state-funded transit projects, regardless of budget, and all projects with the budgets of $10 million or more, regardless of funding source. Together, the set of projects for this reporting period represents $4.2 billion. As a bit of background, RTA implements the PMO program pursuant to Section 2.01B of the RTA Act. RTA is required to oversee the service board's capital programs and expenditures. PMO is part of RTA's fulfillment of this requirement. Specific involvement from our program includes direct reports and meetings from service board project teams, attendance at project meetings, periodic site visits, and periodic reporting to the Illinois Department of Transportation. As of the current reporting period, all projects are either on budget or under budget. There's one project under budget. Details are included in the PMO report. If delays caused solely by state funding are excused, scheduled performance is strong. 83% of our projects are on schedule. Only 4 are behind. Causes of delay are varied. These details are included in the PMO report. However, if we include uncertainty of state capital funding as a cause of project delay, over half of our projects are behind schedule. This represents the true status of transit capital projects in the region, with the number of projects on hold, suspended in various phases. The change order amounts shown here represent cumulative totals for the currently ongoing projects. 83% of the region's projects are without any change orders right now. The vast majority of extra costs for change orders has been for added value to the projects. Selected project highlights include CTA's Wilson Transfer Station project, which remains on schedule and within budget. Metra is moving forward with its Union Pacific West Line expansion, which is funded 50% by the UP Railroad. The scope includes the addition of a third main track. PACE is procuring additional over-the-road buses for its bus-on-shoulder service. The 5-year contract allows flexibility for PACE to place orders as funding becomes available and as needs dictate. This concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Jim. Look, comparing this back to last year and the years before, we've always had a really good report on the success of projects, getting done on time, getting done within budget. I think this is the first year that we've actually identified that state funding, the lack of that coming in as it had been committed to be assigned to projects, is having the kind of impact that it's having. That over 8 projects are delayed because of state funding. Is that something that we just started including in here, or how were we last year as far as that impact? Was it similar? I don't recall it being identified last year, B. As far as state
So
funding.
there was no state delay last year in terms of capital. I mean, we knew what capital funding we were receiving and projects were proceeding. We've worked very closely with IDOT, our capital group, and Leanne to identify all the projects that were like not shovel ready, really shovel in the ground. And so those projects were continued, but some projects were not yet started, and those are the projects that have been suspended. IDOT has told us that they remain committed to funding those projects, so we look at this as a delay. But nevertheless, yes, this would be the first time that this has impacted active projects.
So often at this board, especially in the finance committee, we talk about the impact of delayed dollars coming to us that we have to go out and borrow, do bonding. Now we're looking at the impact of some of our capital project delayed as well.
And keep in mind that there is no state capital program at this time.
Right.
So.
And one of the comments that I heard from one of the service boards at a meeting I was at was that some of the impact of the capital program is that they made allocations of dollars for capital projects. And so if you look at our system as a region, some of the areas now won't be getting projects, others will be because of the source of funding. And so they're looking at that as a major concern because some of it is in balancing our requirements to be met by as far as federal regulations and so forth. So this could become a major concern for a need to readjust capital down the road if we have to.
And if that was necessary, the service boards would submit capital amendments, and they would go through our capital group for your board approval.
Other questions or comments? If not, thank you. Jim, thanks. The next item is the item that, number 4, the ordinance authorizing the short and long-term borrowing. B.
So you had one memo, and there's actually 2 ordinances. One relates to our long-term obligation, and the other relates to our short-term obligation. So we can get that slide up first. Oh, just one moment. We've got to open the slide. Well, let me begin to speak to it. So the general there it is. Of course, if I said that, I knew it would start. So the purpose, as you can see, we're going to speak first about the capital bond series. We're calling it the 2016 A series. This bond issuance was approved by the board actually in December of 2014, and the service boards programmed these monies for 2015. However, we will not close the transaction until January 2016. The proceeds of this bond will be distributed as follows: $50 million for CTA for bus overhauls and purchase, bus overhauls and purchases, and also a high-tech station. $45 million to Metra for bridge projects and positive train control, and $5 million to PACE for buses, facility security system improvements, and the Burr Ridge Park and Ride construction. This transaction will be competitively bid with level debt service over 30 years, and our partners on the project are listed there. Cat Mutual, which was also competitively bid. The financial advisor is Public Financial Management, and the trustee is Amalgamated Bank of Chicago. Now, as you consider this particular bond obligation, keep in mind that, as you have heard from the PMO report, although these are new projects, not previously purchased, encumbered, or started. I mean, that's part of the provisions through this bond. But keep in mind that we have a $36 billion state of good repair need. Keep in mind that there is no state capital program. Keep in mind that rates are low. That, while federal funding certainly through the new FAST bill has increased, there's still a real challenge and a real demand. This does not negate any of the service board's ability to do their own bond issuance, whether it's Metro, CTA, or PACE. But this is in addition to that. And it's money that they have programmed. And so I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. We, as of course, provided you, the preliminary offer statement. On one of those tables, page 14, it shows our debt service coverage. We are required to have 2.5 times coverage by state legislature. Today we have 3.7 times coverage, and actually that chart shows you that in 2016 we'd have 5.7% coverage if you look at sales tax only. If you look at all public revenues, it's actually over 7%. So we are we are exceeding our statutory requirements on debt coverage, but whenever we look at these bonds, we look at them very carefully. But again, rates are low, and we're locking in a fixed rate for 30 years. So open to questions.
Thank you, Bea. A number of these items we've been waiting for some time, so it's good to get the bond process started and implement it. Are there questions or comments? Yes, question, Member Lewis.
B, what is the preliminary rating that's been given by the rating agencies? Do we have that yet?
We just met with the rating agencies last week. We're expecting our ratings the week of the 21st of December. So we don't have them yet. They went well. We were able to tell them, we have a 72% funded pension. We showed them our coverage rate. We showed them how sales tax is coming in 4 point something over last year, and 2 point something% over budget. So we were able, I think, to do a really good presentation, but we won't know our ratings until in a couple weeks or next week.
Do you remember what the rating was in our last issue?
We do have it. I think it was here. I don't have it here, but they were all AA and positive or stable outlooks. But okay. I will verify that.
No worries. And this is, I think, as I recall, this is almost the limit of the authorization that we have approved for bonds. We're almost at the cap. Is that
Our
correct?
cap is $800 million by state statute. Yes, this would take us to just like 46 million left or something like that. And then our plan is not to issue anything again until 2017.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So B, on the
Director Anderson.
On the folks that you have listed there, the bond council, you said you competitively bid at all three of them?
Well, the bond council was bid directly by legal, but it was competitively bid a number of years ago. And 3 years ago, we competitively bid the FAs separately.
So you didn't competitively bid this issuance?
For this specific deal, the bond council was not competitively bid because it was previously competitively bid, and they've been getting the transactions for the last 2 years or 3 years. Nadine would be better able to speak to that. But our FAs, we competitively bid. We have a pool of them, and we've been using them on different transactions.
Are there any minority firms in any of these?
Yes, there are. We had Acacia, which is a DBE, Baxter McCarley, which is an MBE.
These are councils, right?
No, these are all FAs.
FAs. Okay.
FAs. Columbia Capital, Peralta Garcia, DBE, and Sycamore Advisors, another DBE. So we've used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Of the 9, we've used all but 2 on different transactions.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Director Colson.
Thanks, B. And you and I have talked about this at great length, I know. Are any of these bonds being, since we're almost at the limit, are any of these bonds being retired or paid off in the next 5 years?
Yes, I have a chart that actually we presented to our rating agencies, if I could locate it here. Our debt service this is one way to do it. In the preliminary statement, then the POS, on page 14, it shows the debt service declining significantly. So beginning in, in 2020, it starts dropping It continues to drop all the way through, like half in 2028. So as they roll off, the debt service continues to decline. There's also a table in there on page, page 9, that shows, they start in 1990 and they continue. And different, depending on how they were purchased again, they'll roll off at different times.
So how are you able to float possibly new bonds in 2017? You're still going to be up against your limit, right?
No, we're not. We have the 108, we actually have more, the additional 40 million or so. So we have the capacity. The cap is 800 million, so we're less than that. We're 100 and something less than that.
756, I thought, after this bond issue. Is that right?
756, yes, that's about right. And we are not planning to issue, again, depending on capacity, until 2017.
Well, I think this needs to be discussed in the context, the whole context, larger context of debt and the use of debt. This is a 30-year loan to buy buses with a 14-year useful life, right? I mean, that's, at some level, that doesn't make any sense.
So we've looked at the projects carefully, and it isn't just a simple calculation of, the average useful life. It is a calculation looking at the maturity of the bond series, because they could purchase and mature at different times. And it's also a calculation of the assets, the percentage of that value of the assets. I have a project list that goes through, for example, some of the higher dollar amounts are being spent on the longer asset life items. For example, when you look at the master plan, some of the high-tech stations, that's a system-wide CTA improvement to put in train tracker and to do some actual structural changes and so forth. That's being given 20 years. When you look at bridge projects, that's being given 20 years, and that's, I believe, 15 or 20 million of that for Metra. So it's more than just the average calculation. It is a more complex calculation. I could provide more information on that, but we have been, both our FA, PFM, as well as our bond counsel, Kent Mutuam, has confirmed that we are within the required useful lives for that.
Just concerned at some point the debt that the service boards and that we incur is going to be unsustainable. I mean, we're not going to be able to continue to borrow more. We may have to go to a pay-as-you-go for capital projects. That's my concern, and I think there ought to be a larger discussion about what we do if that happens and how close we are to that happening, because debt could be the canary in the coal mine about capital funding, and I think the canary is at least gasping a little bit here.
I understand your concern, Director Colson, and as we talked, I mean, it's, many of these items, it's like, pay now or pay more later, pay as you go is it's like how you run your home, right? You don't want to go out there and take on extra debt, but the reality is this isn't our mortgage. This is, this is investment in the region's infrastructure and in transit. And, some of the, deferred maintenance and repairs can end up costing more in the long run. And money's cheap. You wouldn't do this if, when I say money's cheap, I mean interest rate are lower. You wouldn't do this if interest rates were high, but you're able to lock it in, and you're able to make the investment now. So I know there's lots of ways of looking at this, and I understand that there's headline concerns out there that recently, have been all over the news, but we've been very prudent and we've been very responsible in how this agency has issued debt. It's competitive, it's level debt service. We're operating within our, additional bonds test or coverage, debt service coverage. So, and it's for solid infrastructure investments. It's not for operating, it's not for any of those things.
No, and I appreciate that. And we've got some finance people and some bankers on this board that are far more knowledgeable about all this than I am. I just think there ought to be a larger conversation with the service boards about managing debt going forward, because we're almost approaching our limit. Thanks for all the work you put in on this.
Thank you.
Director Colson, I agree with you that we need to, I think, because it's been brought up a number of times as far as the amount of bond debt that we have, to have an actual finance committee, a working session, just on the bond issues. We do have a policy that this board passed some years back that addressed this issue as far as the CTA and some of the, and the service board, how much of their federal capital dollars could be allocated to paying debt. because it's the same principle. If all of a sudden all of your new federal capital dollars are pledged to existing debt, you have nothing for new capital programs. So we do have a ordinance that this board passed that locked that, and I believe it was at 60%, 40, something like
It's
that.
50%.
50?
And it was actually, you passed it again in the funding allocation budget memo in August, I believe,
Right.
reiterated that.
So it is in our ongoing document, but I think one of the things that'd be good to talk to B about this the other day on the phone, and that is that we'll actually put together a list of all the bond debt we have and how the different ordinances that we have passed look at that debt and what the obligation of the service board and our board is in meeting it, and just have a refresher on where we're at on it, especially with the theory that in 2017, it'll be back before us to consider available debt for additional projects. So I think the timing during 2016 will be a good time to look at that.
You know, Director Colson asked about how other, transit agencies look, or have you done any comparisons? We did look at that, quickly, and we looked at debt service as a percentage of operating budget. So, for example, Boston, MBTA, their debt service as a percentage of their operating budget is 28.5. Los Angeles Metro is 22.4. The CTA is 20%. RTA is 17.9%. Philadelphia SEPTA is 3.7%. And Washington WMATA is 1.2%. Of course, they're in more proximity to funding, so who knows? So they're only 1.2%. But so we started to look at it like, how do we compare to our peers? And we'll continue to look at that.
Are there other questions or comments about the bond issues? If not, we have all three items that we can take in one roll call.
No, I would like to speak to the short-term borrowing.
yeah,
Yes,
okay,
I do
sorry.
have a slide. I
We
don't
do
know
need
where
to
the
do
slide
that.
went. Yeah. So let's bring the one slide back. No, there's a short-term slide. Okay, that's not good. Okay, the short-term borrowing deal, here, 1 second. Okay, I don't know. Sorry about that. Okay, not sure what's going on with our slides over here. Okay, so there it is. Okay. We also, as you know, presented to you a strategic financial plan that was conducted by Sycamore recently. Our goal here is to look at what is the lowest cost vehicle that we could have access to cash markets in the event of the fluctuating, well, we know we have state delays in PTF and the ASA and IFA, which is reimbursement for debt service. By the way, we get $130 million a year that goes toward offsetting that $222 million in debt service. But we get it late. We usually get it at the end of the state fiscal year. In addition, we have the delays in PTF. So we've always historically carried working cash notes here. That's fine, but if you don't use it, you still pay a lot of money. We also have carried a commercial paper product, which expired at the end of October. That was $93 million. We only tapped into that once. But in 2012, the state delay was up to like $385 million. So right now we're, as you'll hear later in the ED report, we're at about $240 million. The reality is that it fluctuates, so we need to be able to make the service boards whole for delays in public funding, not cuts, okay? So if there's cuts, the service boards are responsible to address those, but if there's delays, we're like a bit of the shock absorber to help them get through that period. So they recommended working cash notes, they recommended a direct placement, and they recommended a line of credit, which is the lowest cost alternative. Unfortunately, we don't have state statutory ability to do a line of credit now. We're looking to pursue that ideally in the spring. But this is moving forward with one of the recommendations, which is the direct placement. As you can see, our key parties here are Wells Fargo, Bond Counsel, is Cat Mutual, the financial advisor. In this case is Columbia Capital Management, the trustee Amalgamated Bank, and then the bank counsel is Chapman Cutler. So in this situation, our goal is to, again, have access to these markets at the lowest possible cost. And so this is a separate ordinance on the short-term borrowing. And again, we will only tap into it as we need to. Now, we have a $400 million extension all the way until 2018. Right now, we would have just the 150 in DP, and we have an existing 150 million in working cash notes that we only are, 225, we're only using 125 of that right now. And that rolls off in February, March, April, and May. So we'd use some of this to take that out or to roll it over. So if there's any questions on the short-term borrowing, DP working cash notes, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Director Lewis.
I wanted to ask a question about the use of the facility, kind of almost back to the question that Director Colson asked. How can we be sure that this is funding just a temporary timing issue between funds being received from the state, as opposed to if the state owes money and decides to cut the budget,
Right.
then we funded a permanent need as opposed to a short-term need. How can we be sure that we're differentiating between those two?
Well, as you know, the state sales tax that we levy, okay, is not subject to any kind of an appropriation. The PTF has been looked at as a continuing appropriation. So that's where we have the delays at. And this would be used to address the delays. These taxes have been collected already, you know. So, and the use tax, we've explained that the use tax is the only tax right now that's being withheld. That's about 3 to 3.5 million per month. So that's the only thing that's being withheld. The reality is that should there be a PTF cut or an actual cut in those, which I think is a huge legislative lift. I mean, they've got to get a budget passed, and this would require the same types of votes. But should that happen, we would have to come back to this board with a budget amendment and say this is being reduced by X, and we'd have to make budget amendments in the service board's budgets as well. Again, depending on the significance of it.
But when you fund off this facility, I'm just saying, we would be able to know we're funding not the one that's subject to cuts and appropriation, but the one that's just a timing issue. Would we be able to know that?
Because remember, we're only right now receiving August and September, so we know, you know, it's in the rears. So we are funding something that's already been collected. So if they cut PTF, it would be on a forward basis. And so then we would know, we're always still subsidizing any delays through these facilities, but for PTF in the rears.
And just the other nuanced point, as part of the budget process, you probably recall when we talked about the fund balance question, you know, we reached part of the consensus of the budget negotiation was the RTA is as B calls it, sort of the shock absorber in this short-term shortfalls. But if there is a structural change, i.e. the legislature changes the funds that are due us, that becomes a structural permanent change, then the service boards have acknowledged that they would need to go back and we would all have to collectively revisit all of our budgets. So we wouldn't be using those dollars to fill those short-term gaps, and to fill those permanent gaps, I should say.
Other questions or comments? B, anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Great. With that, is there a motion and second to approve the ordinances as submitted?
Anyone?
So moved.
Moved by Director Anderson, second by
Second.
Director Lewis. Let's have a roll call on this because of being bonds.
Okay, Director Anderson,
Yes.
Director Colson, Director DeWitt,
Yes.
Director Lewis,
Yes.
Director Triani, Director McGallis.
Aye.
6 ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. Item 4B is an ordinance authorizing the 2015 capital program amendment for the fourth quarter 2015. B.
This is actually going to be presented by the capital program. Jill Leary, our new deputy.
Thank you, Joe.
Good morning. Good morning, Director McGallis and members of the Finance Committee. This proposed ordinance addresses changes to the 2015 RTA capital program. The memo you received provides additional background and outlines specific program changes. Overall, the changes being presented today represent $1.65 million in additional funding for the 2015 capital program, bringing the total capital program to about $1.2 billion. This table shows capital revenue changes by funding sources. The middle column indicates the changes. As you can see, there are 2 changes. First, there's a slight decrease in federal funds to reflect the full year federal apportionment. And second, A funding change occurs for service board and local funds with a net gain of $1.65 million that is attributed to an increase in PACE's program, which I will describe next. PACE will use positive budget variance funds totaling $1.65 million. They will add one new project, the design and engineering work for the Barrington I-90 pedestrian bridge project for $650,000, and they will also add funding to an existing project for the purchase and installation of bus shelters for $1 million. PACE also has slight changes to its federal funding allocations. These changes sum to an increase of $1.65 million for PACE. This concludes my presentation, and staff is requesting that the Finance Committee recommend board approval of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? If not, could we have a motion to approve? Move. Motion by Director Karani, second by Director Anderson. Roll call.
Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director Colson? Yes. Director DeWitt?
Yes.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Triani?
Yes.
Director McGallis?
Aye.
6 ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. Item number 4C is the ordinance adopting the 2016 Regional Service Board budgets. And Bill, you're going to be presenting this?
That's correct. Our budget pension investment manager, Bill Ackman, will be presenting this.
Bill, before you start, just to, I guess, open it up a little bit for the thought process is that we did spend December 3rd at a finance meeting where we had the opportunity to hear from all the service boards, and previously we had heard from our own staff for the budgets that we had. They all presented answers to our questions, and I think we had a really good meeting and came out of there feeling that we have a solid budget recommendations from the 3 service boards and from our staff, and that everybody really put forth a lot of effort this year to bring a budget that answers our questions and can move us forward into 2016. Bill, would you?
Good morning. I'm getting the clicker. Let's just make sure I know how to use the clicker. Okay. Whoops. Never do that. Once again, sorry. Good morning. Let's begin this morning with a brief recap of the 7-month process that got us to where we are this morning. On May 21st, the board approved and released the 2016 business plan call. The business plan call defined the information requirements that the service boards follow in the development of the 2016 business plans. The 26 business plans include the 2016 operating budget, the 2017 and 2018 financial plan, and the 2016 through 2020 5-year capital program. A collaborative effort by CTA, METRA, PACE, and RTA staff resulted in a funding agreement adopted unanimously by the board on August 20th, the first August adoption of funding levels in RTA history, a full 25 days prior to the September 15th statutory deadline.
Good job, boss.
Over the course of October and November, the RTA staff conducted a review of the proposed service board business plans and consolidated them with the proposed RTA business plan into the proposed regional 2016 business plan. In November, the RTA CFO and Executive Director presented the regional budget to each county board in the RTA region. On November 4th and 5th, the RTA and METRA held joint public budget hearings throughout the region. The service boards adopted their 2016 budgets and capital programs at their November board meetings. I presented the RTA 2016 agency budget to you at the Finance Committee held on November 19th. As Director McGallis mentioned, at the special Finance Committee meeting held on December 3rd, the service boards presented their budgets and fielded your questions. That evening, the RTA held its last public budget hearing here in this room. Thank you, Directors Pang and Colson, for participating in that. And also, I want to mention that throughout this period, the proposed Regional 2016 Business Plan has been available on the RTA website for both review by the public and public comment. Let's examine the revenue side of the proposed 2016 operating budget. Total revenue from operations is projected to exceed $2.9 billion. That is an increase of 1.2% from our 2015 estimate. Sales tax receipts are expected to grow by 3.5% to just under $1.2 billion and are the largest revenue component at 41% of the total. Service Board operating revenue from fares and other sources, including advertising and concessions, are projected to grow by 1.6% to $1.1 billion and are the second largest component at 39%. The state's 30% public transportation fund match of the RTA sales tax and the City of Chicago real estate transfer tax in the amount of $377 million comprise 13% of total revenues. Reimbursement from the state for debt service on strategic capital improvement, or SCIP bonds, is expected to hold steady at $130 million, or about 4% of total revenue. The real estate transfer tax levied in the City of Chicago to fund CTA operations is projected to decrease by 6.8% from the 2015 budget to about $63.6 million, or 2% of total revenues. There were more large commercial property sales in 2015 than are anticipated in 2016. Finally, other revenue, including state ADA paratransit funding and federal sources, represent 1% of total revenue for operations in 2016. Now, a look at 2016 operating expenses, which are projected to grow by 3.2% to $2.9 billion. Collectively, the Service Board's operating expenses account for more than 90% of regional expenses. CTA's operating budget comprises half of regional expenses, followed by Metra at 26%, PACE Suburban Service at 8%, PACE Regional ADA Paratransit Service at 6%. More on each of these items in a minute. Regional debt service of $222 million accounts for 8% of regional expenses. This amount includes principal and interest on both RTA and SCIP bonds that fund Service Board capital projects and interest on RTA short-term debt. As B mentioned earlier this morning, the RTA issues short-term debt to manage delays in state funding for the service boards, primarily in the form of PTF and reimbursements on debt service for SCIP bonds. RTA agency administrative expenses of $17.7 million and RTA regional program expenses of $17.4 million total $35.2 million and account for only 1% of regional expenses. This amount represents an 8.5% or $3 million decrease from the 2015 agency budget and allows the RTA to allocate more funding to the service boards. Most of this reduction in the RTA agency budget resulted from lower expenditures for the Travel Information Center. Finally, the Joint Self-Insurance Fund expenses of $6.4 million represent less than 1/4% of regional operating expenses. Now, a brief review of each of the service board's budgets. CTA's balanced operating budget reflects an expense increase of 3.3% to nearly $1.5 billion and a recovery ratio of 55.4% exceeding the RTA requirement of 54.5%. Metra's budget is balanced with fare revenue expected to grow by 2% in line with its fare increase. Expenses are projected to increase by 2.8% to $780 million. The budgeted recovery ratio of 52.4% exceeds the RTA requirement of 52%. Pace Suburban Service operating expenses are projected to grow at 7.1% to $228 million, driven by new expenses for debt service, Ventra operating fees, and 2015 and 2016 service expansions. The budget is balanced, and the recovery ratio of 30% meets the RTA requirement. The PACE Regional ADA Paratransit budget anticipates continued ridership growth of 5%, with operating revenue expected to increase in line with ridership. Total expenses are projected at $175 million, driven by both ridership growth and contractor rate increases. On to RTA ICE funding. The allocation of 2016 RTA Innovation, Coordination, and Enhancement, or ICE funding, followed the new process launched for the 2015 budget. Annual ICE funding grows in sync with the RTA sales tax growth. For 2016, a total of $12.2 million was allocated to the CTA, Metra, and PACE, as you can see here. CTA proposes dividing its $5.8 million share between operating and capital. Operating funds in the amount of $1 million will help support the new express bus service on Ashland and Western Avenues. ICE-funded capital projects include an upgrade of CTA's origin destination model, implementation of IT projects, business continuity and disaster recovery, and improvements to facilities and vehicle maintenance. Metra proposes using ICE funding for several capital projects, which include mobile application enhancements, the Metra app, improvements of a crew optimization system, automated passenger counters, and platform heating technology. PACE proposes ICE funding to replace its intelligent bus system, or IBS equipment. Turning our attention to the capital program. The proposed 5-year program contains $3.9 billion of expenditures, with $871.5 million programmed in 2016. Funding sources also total $3.9 billion for the 5-year period. Federal funds account for $2.6 billion, or more than 2/3 of all funding sources. The RTA and all 3 service boards intend to issue bonds to fund the 5-year capital program. Service board funds and $36.8 million of RTA ICE funding round out the 5-year capital funding picture. To reiterate B's words earlier, you'll notice there's no state funding supporting the 5-year capital program. We hope that changes soon. Over the 5-year period, the $3.9 billion of capital funding is programmed as follows. $1.2 billion, or 30%, will be expended on rolling stock. Over half of this amount is for the purchase and rehabilitation of Metra rail cars. At CTA, these funds are for the procurement and rehabilitation of both rail cars and buses. At PACE, these funds are for the purchase of buses, paratransit vehicles, and vanpool vans. Stations and passenger facilities is the second largest asset category at $732 million. At CTA, $557 million is for the Red Purple Modernization Project. At Metra, these funds support the rehabilitation and improvement of stations and parking facilities. At PACE, these funds support the renovation of passenger facilities and the installation of bus shelters, signs, and other passenger amenities. Electrical signal and communications is the third largest asset category at $323 million. At CTA, these funds are for the rehabilitation of the Blue Line, O'Hare Branch, as well as for system-wide power distribution and signal upgrades. Installation of positive train control, or PTC, components comprise nearly half of Metra's allocation for this category. At PACE, these funds are for the purchase and installation of intelligent bus system and mobile data terminals. Track and structure is the fourth largest asset category at $309 million. More than one-third of this total will be used to replace 11 bridges on the Union Pacific North Line, as well as to rehabilitate other bridges throughout Metra's network. At CTA, these funds will support system-wide repairs, including the Your New Blue project. Staff recommends board adoption of the proposed operating budget and 5-year capital program as I've outlined in my presentation. The proposed budgets and capital programs detailed in the ordinance are based on reasonable assumptions, are in balance, and meet the statutory regional recovery ratio requirement of 50%. At this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Bill. That's a great recap of what we heard on December 3rd as well. And I guess a couple of themes that are in the budget this year that, as we move forward, that each of the service boards spoke or addressed at the December 3rd meeting was the one thing they can't anticipate is what's going to happen in Springfield to ongoing state funding of existing expenditures that they have projected in their 2016 budget. We certainly understand that. They also, all three expressed concerns about the capital funding, the lack of that from the state. So I think when we consider the budget today, we have to, of course, realize that without the ongoing state funding that this budget is in part based on, we will have to come back, revisit the budget if that should happen, if we don't get the dollars allocated through the state. Each service board has agreed that they would take that under advisement, readjust their budgets, and bring them back to us for consideration if that has to take place. So I think that with that understanding, we all are in the same boat. We have to anticipate the revenue. We've been receiving it, so we have no reason not to. The other thing that has been achieved in this budget is the final, I guess, elimination of the responsibility RTA board to have a reserve 5% funding policy. Our concern all along was that someone had to at least make sure that there were adequate reserves set aside in case they were needed. Within this ordinance this year, we have a paragraph, and I'll just read it. Whereas each service board will be responsible for maintaining its own fund balance and reserve plan to handle the unforeseen shortfalls in revenue or funding or increases in expenses they should arise. That language in there and the understanding that we had from the December 3rd meeting was that each board understands that. Each board has a plan for how they would go about meeting those reserves. And so I think that's a big plus in what we have. At least we have that understanding of who's on first in that particular matter. I think the staff did a great job in putting the budget together, obviously getting out front with our directors meeting and really hammering out the problems and issues before they get to this board has made a much better process. And certainly not having a massive debt that we were trying to make up helps as well. So we're fortunate to have a budget that we can move forward with earlier than we've ever done before. So with that, thank you, and we'll open it up for questions from the board members if we have any additional questions. Questions or comments? If not, could we have a motion to approve the budget as submitted? Motion by Director Lewis, second by Director DeWitt. Roll call.
Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director Colson?
Yes.
Director DeWitt?
Yes.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Troyani?
Yes.
Director McGallis?
Aye.
6 ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments come before the committee? If not, a motion to adjourn. Motion by Director DeWitt, second by Director Lewis. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. I knew I could count on you.